Hello and good morning, everyone. I want to just say, because I feel like this is the kind of room I can share this in. This morning, I woke up to two very sick children, young children, one with pink eye, one just snotty everywhere. Husband has an important morning meeting, so it has been a scramble. And luckily, a young woman who babysits for us down the street, we were able to get a hold of her. She called in sick to her job so she can come babysit our kid. And I made it here, and only because, Belen was texting me, letting me know it's gonna be okay. They've moved the agenda around. Maria in the audience came and said, I'll park your car, just come out front. Then I walked in, and of course the fabulous Tanya beat, just with her calm demeanor, everything's fine. And I'm like this. So this is the thing that so many of us go through, but we make it, we show up, and I'm so honored to be here, and I want to thank you all for asking me to be here. So with that, I'm going to kind of go through what I was planning on doing, which is sharing with you a very brief video about the dream gap.
Let's talk about the dream gap. What's that? It's the gap that comes between girls and their full potential. We need to see brilliant women being brilliant and see how they got to where they are. To imagine ourselves doing what they do. We need all of you to help. We need to close the dream gap. It's up to all of us.
You can have your own opinions about Barbie, but I thought there's a few of these videos that I've been very impressed with, because we're often talking about the gap in CEOs, the gap in income, the gap in retirement, but really that all starts for young girls. I have two of them, two sick ones, who don't start dreaming in the same way that necessarily our boys may, about what their potential is, and that starts that young. And that dream gap ends up looking like a gap in prosperity. And that gap in prosperity isn't just about economic success, but it's about how people feel valued in their communities, in the workforce, where they shop, who listens, who's hearing you, are you being respected, and also in representation and empowerment and autonomy. For example, we know that many women who are abused in domestic situations can't leave because they don't have economic opportunity. So these are some of the goals that we have been working on through the Shared Prosperity Council that that Sue just mentioned over here, because we do want to recognize that while economic opportunity is critical, it can't stand alone for us to achieve what we want and to really bridge the gap in the dream gap. So I'm here really kind of to set some context for all of you. And that context looks like defining what is equity. What is it that we want to try to achieve? How do we get there? We define equity as just and fair inclusion into a society where all can participate and reach their full potential. And the work for us is about creating the conditions that enable every child born to reach that full potential and their full potential. And I would just like you to close your eyes for a second and really think about, what would that feel like if every child born is born into arms that love them, that care for them, They have the opportunity to go to school where they want, to express themselves. Their identity is appreciated, cared for, respected. Think about all that we could be. How many diseases would we have cured? How much beautiful music and art might we be surrounded by? How much love could this world have? That's what it means to try to ensure that everyone can reach their full potential. But let me ask you this, reaching your full potential isn't just about yourself, right? It's about the context that you are born into or experience in your life. So let's say I tell you that a black woman and a white man are running a foot race. And he achieves a two minute, he finishes in 2 minutes and she finishes in 3 minutes. Do you think maybe she's slower? We don't know. Maybe she's a couch potato and he's an athlete. We don't know. Maybe he tripped her. We don't know. So one of the things that's really important is when we're looking to advance equity, we have to understand the context of which people experience their lives. And in the context, if you just look at the outcomes, if you only look at a data number and you see 3 minutes versus 2 minutes and the demographics of that, you're not going to know that this was the race. So you have to show and think about numbers in context. And so I'm going to do that a little bit for you when we think about this concept of what equity is versus equality. Because equality, we often think about fairness. What's fair? Well, it's fair. My kids say it's fair if you give me the same thing you give her. Fairness is not getting the same thing. That's not equity. So right here, if you have folks here that want to see the game, if you give them the very same thing, they're not going to be able to all see the game because it's not recognizing that there's different starting points. And then certainly not recognizing that there's different barriers for people. And ultimately, the goal is to journey towards justice, is to remove those barriers and even out the playing field. And that is our work together. And part of that work requires us to think about what is that context that we live in now? What are those barriers? Well, they come from a very, very long history of oppression and discrimination, codified into law, implemented, also structurally embedded into our systems, and then implicitly implemented. I'm not going to go through all of these, and I'm sure these are not even all of them. They're just all the ones that I could fit on one slide. But I think that the impact I want you to see is that while we have all these systems of oppression, they don't stand on their own with one and two individual. They stand on a deck of policies and practices that have created the context of why that woman may run a 2 minute versus a 3 minute for the man. So just kind of moving on, I wanted to share that the context that I'm talking about isn't for a minority of people. I know this is a conference specifically about women, but take a look at the various levels of diversity that we have in this county. We have been majority people of color since the year 2000. We have a large immigrant population. We've got approximately up to 64% people of color. But if you think about the narrative of Silicon Valley, is that what people think about? No. People don't think about that. So the majority are actually marginalized, is what we see here. And you'll see in some of my talk, I talk a lot about the concept of race. And it's not alone, it doesn't stand on its own, but I want to be clear about why would I lead with race, especially at a conference focused on women. And it's important because, one, I lead with race, but I'm not exclusively focused on race. It is about the various identities that we all hold. And many of us hold a lot more in common, in fact, than we might be able to immediately see. But you have to recognize that racism and white supremacy are embedded into the foundation of the United States, and were built into the structures and systems that, in fact, many of us work for and operate. Race is also a major determinant of life's outcomes, whether it's education, it's income, it's jobs. And what's really important to recognize is that racism runs deep within other forms of oppression, whether it's patriarchy and sexism, heteronormity, ageism, ableism, transphobia, whatever it may be. So if you are a woman of color in a patriarchal system, you are still marginalized. You still have layers of oppression within that patriarchal structure that others don't have. And so it is important for us to see all of one another within the challenges that we face. And I say that in particular because it's important for us to stay together. And if we don't start to see each other and recognize the challenges that others have, and I always say this, individually, all of us connect most with the most vulnerable parts of ourselves. Whether that was having buck teeth when you were little and being made fun of it, being bullied as a kid, whatever it may be. And so sometimes we have a hard time recognizing that we may have some privilege now. And that's something we have to start to get comfortable with. What is our power and privilege? How does that relate to the context that I'm working in? So race is not one and the same as the focus here on patriarchy and on women's empowerment, but it is absolutely a part of it that we can't ignore. Now, looking at this economic success concept, we have so much prosperity in San Mateo County. We're actually, when the Brookings Institute looks at the largest metropolitan regions across the United States, we are in this region we're the first and the second most prosperous across the United States out of 56 regions. But we are 46th and 54th for racial inclusion in that prosperity. We can do better. Housing is a major issue, but again, it's an issue that is not devoid of race. What we see here, that 68% of whites have home stability. They are homeowners, versus much less in our other communities of color. We also see that 50% of renters are burdened with how much they have to pay, and that's a much higher amount than when you see on the bottom. Severe housing burden is considered 50% of your income being paid to housing. 30% is considered affordable. You'll see that in San Mateo County, 25% of renters are burdened paying 50% of their salaries or their income on housing versus 12% of owners. So home ownership not only is stability, it also means financial wealth and opportunity. Here we have economic success, and you'll see these are the hourly wage on the y-axis, and then we have race, and then across the y-axis, the x-axis. The blue is female, and the black is male. And so you can see here that there is just such a difference, not just by gender for income, but also by race. And that the lack of opportunity is true almost for women versus men is almost true and consistent across all different racial categories with the exception of black. Next, looking at educational attainment. Here we also see a huge difference in educational opportunities and outcomes over the years for different racial groups. You see that 56% of people of color are able to meet the UC-CSU requirements in San Mateo County versus 75% of white youth. This one here I think is really powerful for me. This is one that I continually look at and update. This is all the school districts, the public school districts in San Mateo County on the y-axis. And what you see in the darker color lines, bars, that's the percentage of kids on free and reduced lunch program. And then the lighter blue is the percentage of third graders that are reaching third grade reading level. So what you're looking at is an inverse relationship. The more students that are, for the most part, the more students that are in free and reduced lunch program, the less are getting reading or achieving their third grade reading level, which is a predictor for graduation and ultimately opportunities for careers and jobs. So we are currently, as our school system sit, we are recreating this cycle of poverty and lack of opportunity by way of our systems. And as many of you know, these inequities that we've talked about, the barriers, those fences where you have a starting point, they all catch up to you and they live in your bodies. Our bodies are holding the symptoms of so many social ills, economic ills, all the isms that were on the very busy slide. Our bodies keep the score. And what we see is disparities across numerous health outcomes based on race. And if you cut it by education level and income, they tend to also have the same disparities. So even in the years of life that you get to live. So I'm going to share with you something that the Shared Prosperity Coordinating Council has been working on, which is how do we think about prosperity and moving along prosperity in an honest way? Because one, you need to be stabilized first. You can't jump to wealth creation if you can barely make ends meet and keep a food on the table for your kids, barely get them picked up in the morning. Then you need to get to a place where, okay, now that I have some stability, I can move towards mobility. I can think more about my career. Okay, where is there opportunity to get to self-sufficiency? I don't need food stamps anymore. I don't need that, right? And then you can think about, well, what about the power I have? How do I utilize it? Maybe I need to have a voice. I think the speaker before me was so poignant in talking about civic engagement and participation. Getting out there, letting your voice know, making sure that your lived experiences are integrated into the decisions that ultimately impact your lives. That gives you some control. You first need to control your immediate surroundings before you think you might be able to have empowered to say more about that. And while I'm, talking a lot about these challenges, some of the barriers or the different differentiated starting points that looked like this, but for some people it's more like this. And so just the fact that folks have such beautiful family cultures, so much power and ancestral histories that come together, organizing, the caring for one another, the ability to call a neighbor, all of those people I called this morning were women, by the way, and they were all women of color, and they all showed up, and they all helped me stabilize for a second so I could be here with you all today. But it is not to forget that we bring so many assets, and just our existence now is radical. And so I really do hope that you all have the opportunity to continue working with the Commission on the Status of Women, who's doing a wonderful job. I think women can be the leaders in supporting women's equality, as well as being the leaders in supporting equity overall. So thank you for your time.